My name is Ben Burgis. I am the author of this book, Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, which is due out from Zer0 Books at the end of May. God and John Hunt Publishing willing, it's going to be available for pre-order in no more than a week or two after you see this video. What I'd like to talk about today is a fallacy called argumentum ad populum, which I feel totally ridiculous saying, so I am going to use the catchier English phrase, the bandwagon fallacy. I want to talk about it in particular in relation to something that everybody's been talking about the last week, which is Russia.
This is the Kremlin, citadel of Russian communism. Looking at Russia, we might see it as a country to be studied, as we study other nations of the world. Yet we know that Russia today is regarded as a grave threat to our nation, to our freedom, to the peace of the world. Why so? What makes it a threat? Looking closer, we see a clue. Public display of giant portraits of communist leaders.
So, since I am talking about Russia, I should really be drinking vodka, but my wife Jennifer gave me this wonderful bottle of single malt the other day, so I'm going to drink this instead. The long-awaited Mueller report was finally turned in last week, and although we haven't seen that, we have seen a summary from Barr, and the Barr summary says that there was some evidence of obstruction, but there was no finding of collusion, and some Russiagate dead-enders are really clinging to the specificity of the language. There was no finding of collusion with the Russian government, but of course that's really what the main narrative of the last few years has really single-mindedly been about. Right? It's not been about the kind of thing which might still very well be true, that Donald Trump has. Actually, I'd be kind of surprised if he didn't have some shady connections with, various Russian oligarchs and mafia bosses, because that seems like the kind of way that Donald Trump has lived his life. He's a petty criminal. But the core charge of collusion with the Russian government about the election, apparently Mueller couldn't find any evidence, or, okay, sorry, I hear you out there, Russiagate dead-enders, he couldn't find sufficient evidence of that, and there could be no further indictments. Of course, a lot of people are parsing this report the way that JFK obsessives will go frame by frame through the Zapruder film, and trying to find, rays of hope for the idea that there is a great uncovered Russia conspiracy, but kind of doesn't look like it. Or at the very least, if that does turn out to be true, then it's going to be a mystery why Mueller himself didn't correct this wildly misleading summary of his report, if it was that misleading. As somebody who you'll be extremely unsurprised to know, given everything about me, spent, far too much of the last 3 years arguing with my liberal friends on social media about this and kind of poking fun at liberals' obsession with the Russia angle. It would be very easy to do this sort of brocialist victory lap. Hey, we were right, the liberals were wrong, that a lot of people have been doing lately. But hey, if you want to watch that, that's out there, right? That's not the main point of this. The point of this is to think harder about what went wrong. To be clear, when I say what went wrong, I should lay out what it would have been to get this right? What I thought and still think the right attitude would have been, which is that for a lot of the specific charges that could have been true, I think the right attitude was just to reserve judgment until such time as you got sufficient evidence to back them up, and to go, starting with that sort of default position for most of the charges, to go more and more skeptical as the charges got more ridiculous, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you're claiming that Donald Trump was a compromat-controlled Russian agent, and despite the fact that his foreign policy was actually considerably more hostile, Syria, Ukraine, etc., to Russian interests than Obama's foreign policy had been, then that would really require a lot of evidence even to get me to take that seriously, so I didn't really see a reason to take it seriously. Now, I do think that some people who are on the side that I'm instinctively more drawn to identify with on here, the Greenwalds and Taibis, I do think some of those guys sometimes overstated the case in their own way, and sometimes I've been seeing some overstating of what the evidence really shows from those guys this week, as they do fall into the temptation to do the victory lap. Glenn Greenwald, when he's at his best, is very clear on this. There's a distinction between saying there's not enough evidence of X for us to be justified in affirmatively believing X, but that's not the same as saying that X didn't happen. It's just saying I don't yet have reason to believe that X happened. That's a really important distinction, and sometimes he's very good on it, but sometimes he'll start talking about lies and hoaxes as opposed to using what I think would be the more justified language, which is jumping to unjustified conclusions, which of course is a different thing from lying or perpetrating a hoax. Maybe there's some of that too. In fact, in some cases, sure, but as a more general claim, I think you're better off just saying, people, we're jumping to conclusions and letting their speculative imaginations get the better of them. That's really the core thing that we should be saying about this. It's an important distinction to make that's what I'm saying, as opposed to, you should have believed there was definitely nothing to any of this at any point, which I think would overstate the case in the other direction. There was some shady stuff that merited investigation. Fair enough. Never denying that. So, why does it matter? Well, the reason why it matters is twofold. One, the immediate political effects of this narrative were disastrous, that this was used as a reason for liberals to rehabilitate the careers of neocons and ghouls and war criminals from the George W. Bush administration. David Froome, David Froome makes me sad to be an atheist because I don't believe in the existence of hell, and he definitely deserves that. But all these guys, had, second act in political life as Russia obsessives. That's very not good. Similarly, the fact that the prevalence of paranoia and jumpiness about Russia, even though, as Matt Taibbi said on the Michael Brooks show last week, sure, Russia, try to influence elections, in its case, apparently pretty incompetently, if you look at those Facebook ads. But, America is Rome. It controls the world. Everywhere tries to influence our elections, and Russia's probably not in the top 10. So the paranoia and obsession with, Russia hacking our democracy and things like that really unnecessarily escalated geopolitical tensions, and that's also not good. So all that stuff's one reason why it's important. But I think there's a second, much broader reason. And before I want to talk about that, I want to talk about the reason why I think the people who didn't do what I just suggested got it wrong, which is that they were committing the bandwagon fallacy. So the bandwagon fallacy is the mistake in reasoning that you make when you take the mere fact that a view is really popular, that, it's what, the populum, the masses think, as a reason to believe it, or, to increase your degree of belief in it, maybe, if you want to go all Bayesian on it. It's really important to avoid this particular fallacy going forward, Not so much because the details of this particular thing and whether Donald Trump, who is an utter scumbag and criminal, who, by the way, has committed lots of real impeachable offenses, like holding on to his business empire after taking the office of the president, which is clearly a constitutional no-no, but like whether Donald Trump committed this particular crime is less important than the larger political stakes going forward. That if you have the kind of emancipatory political project that I think if you are a Zer0 Books fan, you are more likely to be sympathetic to, one of not just like supporting the wing of the national security state that's aligned with neoliberal Democrats over the wing of the national security state that's aligned with conservative Republicans, but supporting politics that pushes back against the entire national security state, that aims at dismantling the American empire and taking on the power of the 1% here at home. If that's your project, right? And I mean, I know that's a pretty vague description that could accommodate a lot of kinds of leftism, but anything in that broad sphere, if that's your project, you really want to immunize yourself and try to help immunize others against the habit of jumping on the bandwagon every time somebody gets excited and starts speculating about something that a national security official whispered in our, ears, because who national security officials are likely to really dislike? People with that political project. So not a good idea. I know I'm wearing a Bernie Sanders t-shirt right now. Bernie definitely made the mistake of jumping on the bandwagon more than he should have with this stuff. So this is not like you're canceled if you did this. This is an epistemic mistake that we should all learn from together. So why is it an epistemic mistake? We don't want to be too quick about it, right? So a point that I'm very frequently making in these videos is that it's really easy to learn the names of some logical fallacies and to, have kind of a hair trigger for accusing people of them. But that's also not good if you want to actually be good at reasoning. What's much harder and more valuable is learning to be thoughtful and exercise good judgment about whether those fallacies are there or not, right? Oh, is something an appeal to authority, or is it a legitimate citation of expert opinion? Is it an ad hominem, or is it a legitimate reason to trust a source less than you would otherwise? Similarly, we want to balance trying to avoid the ad populum fallacy against what might be a legitimate procedure, which has to do with what philosophers call epistemic peer disagreement. So epistemic peer disagreement is the situation where somebody else who's just as smart as you, who's just as good at reasoning as you are, and who has access to all the same information that you do about some factual subject is looking at that same subject, and they draw a different factual conclusion than you did. And philosophers who are interested in problems about knowledge, epistemologists, draw really different conclusions for about epistemic peer disagreement. So one camp says the mere existence of a disagreeing epistemic peer isn't a good enough reason to back off, your whatever degree of belief you have that you're right. And the other camp says, no, it is, right? It's not necessarily a good enough reason to just abandon your beliefs or say that the epistemic peer is right or even suspend judgment, but it's at least a good enough reason to believe it a little bit less, to suspend your position a little bit. And I want to give you a quick view of the reason why philosophers who have that position have it. So think about a case like this. Me and my friend Mark are both trying to solve the same math problem, and we both use our calculators, and we try it a bunch of times, and to make sure, watch each other while we do it, make sure we're punching in the numbers correctly, but the calculators get different results. One of them must be malfunctioning. Well, it would be really irrational for me to leap to the conclusion that my calculator must be giving the right result because it's mine. That, okay, one of the calculators at least must be wrong, so the one that's wrong must be Mark's. He's, he's from Texas, they must just not produce good calculators there because my calculator must be right because it's mine. Well, if you can see that that's irrational, these philosophers point out, then why is it any more rational to say that when I thought about it in my brain, I came to a different conclusion based on the same evidence than Mark did when he thought about it in his brain? If we have no particular reason to think I'm smarter than him, why is it that it would be more rational for me to say, nope, I'm not going to soften my belief one bit just because Mark said this, my brain wins because it's mine, than it would be to say my calculator wins because it's mine. Okay, now, there's a huge debate in this literature about which of those positions is generally right, or a lot of people think that sticking to your guns is appropriate in some epistemic situations and softening the degree of belief is appropriate in other epistemic situations. Huge philosophical debate. I'm not going to try to settle in the last 3 minutes of this video, but I just want to point out that this wouldn't be a good enough reason to justify the kinds of inferences a lot of people on the progressive left and even kind of the social democratic left, Bernie, and even edging into, some parts of the socialist left maybe, made when it came to Russia, right? You can't justify it by saying, oh, no. They did have a good reason to take some of the more intrinsically implausible allegations seriously because so many other people were taking them seriously, at least out of that section of the populum that they cared about, the MSNBC watching populum, not the Fox News watching populum. But I don't think that's right. And the reason that I don't think it's right is that I don't think when you look at their behavior over the last 3 years, you can really conclude that Rachel Maddow and co. were, at least if they were operating in good faith, were epistemic peers of the Greenwalds and Taibbis of the world. Because, look, it's one thing to say, okay, hey, there's some, fishy stuff here. Let's investigate, and we'll wait to see what happens until after we investigate. It's another thing to speculate wildly and treat wild speculations as if, we had good reason to think they were at least probably true, or maybe even definitely true. Go on and on and on about how Trump, was acting like he was a puppet, and, even as he was shooting down Russian planes in Syria and sending heavy weaponry to rebels in, Ukraine, the government, forces in the Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that, withdrawing from arms control agreements, that, you're still taking this compromise fantasy seriously. That seems to indicate either a level of dishonesty that undermines from that direction the conclusion that this person is an epistemic peer, or if not dishonesty, at least frivolousness, right? Or just recklessness about what really follows from the evidence. And either way, I think that if you believed this stuff on the basis of the MSNBC crowd believing it, that was a mistake. That's the bandwagon fallacy. Do better.
Thanks for watching this Zer0 Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zer0 Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zer0 Books book club and help us to continue making online content from the left.